right, welcome back to another episode of the Home Turf Podcast. This is the second installment of this new series I'm starting where I bring on a guest from the opposing school of Texas A&M football schedule. Today, I am joined by Dan Davidson of Appalachian State's student paper. Do you want to talk a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, so I'm Dan Davidson. I'm a sports editor at the Appalachian. The Appalachian is App State student newspaper. I think we've been the student newspaper since like 1934, I think. But yeah, that's my role. I cover all App State sports. I've been doing that since my freshman year. I've been the sports editor for the past 2 years, but yeah, that's basically my job.
Hey, I'm glad to have you on here. Just a little bit of an anecdote to start this off because I just think it's funny, so I want to share this with everyone. Heading into this, I didn't even consider the fact that him and I are in different time zones. So we were like, hey, want to get this started at 7:30? 6:30 rolls around, and I guess Dan's waiting for me. And I'm like, man, I got another hour left.
So yeah, I was sitting there wondering if we were still going to do this thing. Didn't even think about it.
Absolutely. And so I'm just like, man, this is a learning experience for me. So before we get started, I want to go ahead and shuttle my way into a little bit of an ad read real quick. This podcast is sponsored by Hitch. No car, no problem. Hitch offers private and shared rides from Aggieland to Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and more. Anywhere you need to go in Texas, Hitch can get you there. First ride is free. Code AGSWIN5. That's spelled AGSWIN5. Just go to ridehitch.com for any, hitchhiking needs that you have. So let's go ahead and get started into this podcast now. Week 1 game for Appalachian State was one of the best games across the week 1 slate. Just talk to me about that absolute barn burner of a game.
It was, it was crazy. It all started, really the night before people were camping out. And so the night before people, or at least that's what I heard. I drove by the stadium at like 11 or so and didn't see anybody out there, but I heard that people were going to camp out there later. And then I talked to people tailgating before. They said they got there like 5, 6 in the morning. People were getting in line to get into the game. Gates opened at 9, but they were getting in line around 5:30. So it was crazy. It was a sellout since I think July. And we had our largest crowd of all time, 40,168, I think it was. And our previous record was like 35,100 and something people. So it was crazy. It was just a crazy day all around. Obviously, it being an in-state thing, a lot of App State students are friends with Carolina students. And so that's part of why it was so huge, part of why there were so many people there. But it was insane. And then the game itself, of course, somehow topped it. It was, the funny thing is App State got off to like a 21-7 lead. And then through the second and third quarter, it was kind of boring. Carolina pretty much just dominated App through the second and third quarter. App State scored at the beginning of the second, but then not through the rest of the second, not through the third. And so fans actually started to leave. Like, I don't know exactly how many, but maybe like 10% of the stadium, maybe a little bit less, left going into the fourth quarter. And then chaos broke out. And it was, I think there were 9 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, 9 or 10. But it just started and it just kept going, touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. It was, I don't know, never seen anything like it. It was crazy.
Yeah, man. 40 points in the fourth quarter alone for Appalachian State. Then, you mentioned 21-7 lead to start. I believe is 41-21 or something similar to that at one point in favor of North Carolina. And then 40 points for Appalachian State. Still didn't quite manage to pull it out. It looked like the game was over at the very end when they didn't convert the 2-point conversion, the slight overthrow, miscommunication, whatever you want to call that one.
Yeah.
And then goes into the onside kick, taken for a touchdown. Chase Bryce drives him down, and then another 2-point conversion stop. It was just an absolutely wild game. But I'm going to kind of try and parlay that a little bit into talking about the offense. Chase Bryce, amazing game from him. Clemson transfer from a few years back, 6 touchdowns in that one. Just kind of what should A&M people be able to expect from Chase Bryce specifically?
Yeah, so Chase, at Clemson, he was a backup to Trevor Lawrence, of course, and when he did play, he played well. And then he went to Duke. He really struggled at Duke. I think he threw like the most interceptions in the country that year, and then transferred to App after. And last year he broke school record for the most yards thrown, I'm pretty sure. And then obviously this weekend, most touchdowns in a game in school history. So last year he was kind of, depending on the game, a little bit hot or cold, but if he's on, he is pretty deadly accurate. He can throw a really good deep ball. He's not a mobile quarterback. He can't really escape or run. He showed this past weekend that if there's a lane open, he can take it and he can pick up some yards. But for the most part, he's not really a mobile quarterback. He'll just stay in the pocket and try to pick apart the defense from there.
Outside of Chase Bryce, though, what else should Aggies expect from the Appalachian State offense? I mean, 60 plus points scored. I don't know if that was anything that Appalachian State Mountaineers fans were, expecting heading into the game, but what can A&M kind of hope to see from the Appalachian State offense?
Yeah, so certainly weren't expecting 60 points. We expected a decent amount of points just because Carolina's defense didn't look like they were particularly strong heading into the game, and App's defense also lost several guys from last year. So we were expecting points, but obviously 124 combined points was not expected. App has great running backs. They really go 4 deep at running back. Coach Clark says they go 6 deep, but they'll probably play 5 of them ish. We'll see. But they go a solid 4 deep. Nate Noel is kind of the scat back, the speedy guy, and he's really good, tough to catch. He was last year's first team All Sun Belt running back, and then in preseason this year, I'm pretty sure he was the first team, and then Cam Peoples, I'm pretty sure was the second team running back preseason for the conference. He's more of the power back. He's a bigger, taller guy. But yeah, those are the 2 main guys, Noel and Peoples. Daytrich Harrington will play. There's another new running back that'll play as well. He's listed, I think, 3rd on the depth chart. But yeah, the running backs are the best part of the offense, in my opinion, or the strongest part of App's offense. The wide receivers, App has several good receivers, but all of them are kind of new-ish. They've been in the program for a while, but they've been playing behind 4th and 5th year receivers that have been there forever. So they're finally this year getting their chance to get some serious playing time. But Deshaun Davis seems to be the speedy receiver that'll get screen passes or sweeps. Christian Wells is the most prolific receiver heading into this season. He's gotten the most playing time in the past. He's solid. Caden Robinson is a good transfer. He got that last touchdown on Saturday, but several solid receivers. But definitely the focal point or the strongest point of our offense is going to be the running backs, and then our offensive line as well. Brought back 4 or 5 starters. So,
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Chase Bryce 6 touchdowns, and you're saying that the running backs is the focal point of the offense, which I mean, you kind of have to look at the quarterback a little bit more when you're in a high scoring affair like that one,
yeah.
especially when you were trailing down by 20 at one point. So kind of to go into the Appalachian State defense, I mean, again, gave up 60 points last week. So one person I specifically kind of wanted to bring up was Nick Hampton, the outside linebacker. I don't know if you're familiar with Bruce Feldman, a writer for The Athletic. He does his Freaks List articles every single year. He pulls out some of the best athletes across the country every single year. And his goal is to just kind of highlight them and put them in front of the main stage for everyone else to see. And so Nick Hampton was the number 84 ranked person on his list. And so I kind of wanted to bring him up because there were some interesting things that he brought up. He's an imposing 6'3". This is me quoting his article, 6'3", 240 pounds, who incline presses 365 pounds, sumo deadlift 600, broad jumps 10.6, vertical 39 inches, hits 21 miles per hour on the GPS. Just an absolutely insane athlete. And I mean, there's still been some production on the field too. 19 and a half career sacks, 30 and a half tackles for loss. So kind of just talk about maybe Nick Hampton first, and then kind of talk a little bit about the defense.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I'd forgotten about that article, but when you brought up Nick Hampton, the first word that came to my mind was freak. The dude's a monster. I mean, he really is a freak. I think he had 2.5 sacks on Saturday, but yeah, he's pretty legit. The linebacker core is solid. We lost DeMarco Jackson, who got drafted by the Saints last year. He was the best player on our defense last year. But brought back Trey Cobb, Stephen Jones Jr. in the secondary. So the defense on paper thought it would be pretty solid. Obviously, Saturday didn't exactly look like it. So it's kind of hard to say what we're going to get, especially this Saturday against, a top-ranked SEC team. So it'll be interesting, but the defense should be solid. We lost Demetrius Taylor as well on the defensive line, and he was huge for App for the past several years. Jordan Earl on the defensive line is a really solid player. Trying to think of who else is out there on defense. Andrew Parker is a newcomer. He was really solid this past weekend. He led the team in total tackles. But that is obviously, as you might guess, the side of the ball where App State fans have the most concern heading into this game. Because it sure didn't look very promising against Carolina this past weekend.
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina, the main thing that everyone kind of said about North Carolina heading into the season is, man, so much talent has departed from that program in the last 2 years. I mean, they were saying that last year when it was just Sam Howell, and now Sam Howell's the one who's gone. And I mean, they're, one of the better receivers in the entire country didn't even play in that game as well. 60 points put on them. I wanted to ask you kind of to put into perspective for Aggies then, what do you think would be the weakest part of the defense when you're looking at App State? I mean, because 60 points is obviously a whole lot of points, but at the same time, these kinds of just blowout games where it's like one team scores a ton just kind of happen. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the status of the defense going forward. Yeah. So what do you think going forward would be probably the weak point of the App State defense?
You see, it's kind of tough just because every part looked like a weak part on Saturday. I think something that the defense really struggled with was, well, first of all, Drake May is legit. That dude's pretty insane. Obviously, he looked great against Florida A&M in their first game, but he was making every throw on Saturday, and he's a mobile quarterback, and the defense really struggled with that. Anytime that I think a big issue was that Drake May had a lot of time to throw a lot of the day. And even if he did end up getting some pressure on him, he could just escape and, scamper for 20 yards or something. And so I think that was certainly an area that the defense struggled with and might continue to struggle with is with mobile quarterbacks like that, because even if the secondary was covering well, Drake May would take off and there's really nobody that could account for that because I think Drake May's like 6'5" and is actually fast. So he was just tough. So yeah, I don't know exactly what I'd say is the weakest part of the App State defense going forward. I guess maybe the D line based on Saturday's performance, but at the same time, the lines are kind of what really has the biggest discrepancy when you look at Group of Five versus Power Five, because Power Five Texas A&M teams, those linemen are 6'5", 400 something pounds, just absolute monsters. And so I think that probably might be the weakest part.
I know Texas A&M takes a lot of pride in the big boys down low. Yeah. That was definitely something, though, that in the Sam Houston State game was an area of concern, specifically in the run game. Devon Achane, junior running back, expected to be a candidate for maybe the Doak Walker, some of these like really big awards, wasn't really able to get a lot of action on Saturday because there just wasn't a lot of running room. And Jimbo Fisher said in the press conference afterwards, it wasn't Achane's fault. He said that it was on the offensive line. They got a little bit of improvement in the third quarter, kind of faded away from it again, heading into the fourth. But I wanted to touch back on that Drake May comment. 6'4", 220 freshman for North Carolina. You were mentioning mobile quarterback. During the game, 12 carries, 76 yards, 1 touchdown. And that's one thing that A&M could potentially try and take advantage of in that situation, because Haynes King is definitely a mobile quarterback for Texas A&M. So I think that's something then that definitely every Aggie fan can kind of look forward to going forward. Yeah. Although I think that if last week is any indication of the offensive line's play, this could be a very important game going forward to look at how A&M's offensive line then stacks against App State's defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, no, and that is something that App State fans are going to be very worried about heading into this. They really struggled with Drake May being mobile. And any time that he wanted to run, he would, and he'd pick up a first down pretty much every time, or 2-point conversions, or he ran one in for a touchdown. So that is certainly something that Texas A&M will probably exploit.
So I wanted to kind of move that into a little bit of expectations for week 2. What do you think could be the expectation for either an A&M fan or for an App State fan looking into this game? What could be expected of the game? Do you think that it's going to be a big scoring game, a low scoring game? Do you think it's going to be all about the run games?
Yeah, I think the run game is going to play a huge part, just because if you get the run game going, it opens up so much in your offense. And that's going to be huge with, like I was saying, the discrepancy on the lines. If App State is able to run the ball well, then that's obviously going to be very telling, because a huge concern is just that Texas A&M is just going to be too big, too strong, just freak athletes all over the place. So if App State is able to get the run game going, that would be huge. I don't think that me personally, I'm expecting a particularly close game. App is certainly not a pushover opponent by any means, and Jimbo Fisher spoke on that to an extent today. App State's a great football program, but I just personally don't see App being able to score very much on Texas A&M this weekend. And I think that
if there's one thing about Jimbo Fisher, he will put respect on any opponent that he plays against. He was talking big on Sam Houston State heading into the game. Yeah. And A&M didn't look particularly great at times against App State, against Sam Houston rather. Mm-hmm. There definitely could be some similar things going on. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vegas line for the over under is set way too high based on the fact that A&M scored 31 and App State scored 60, because I could very much see both teams establishing the run, especially if that is the mantra. A&M wants to establish the run. They just weren't able to in the last game. And as you mentioned, App State wants to establish the run. And again, not really the name of the game in that situation. Chase Bryce, 6 touchdowns, probably not going to be the situation you see in the coming weeks. But I would be not very surprised if it's just a run heavy game, low scoring. Maybe both teams are under 30 points. Something similar to that. Now, I'm not going to make you give a score prediction necessarily, but if you were to anticipate how the game goes, what do you think will be the situation that occurs?
Well, I would pick Texas A&M to win. I'll go ahead and say that. Man, I haven't even with this, how crazy this game was this past week, and I haven't even moved on from this past week to start thinking about this game, honestly, because we're still writing a couple more stories about this weekend alone. But I think App State will put up a fight. I think they'll score a couple times, but I see Texas A&M winning by 2 or 3 scores, I think I would say. But like I said, haven't had a ton of time to think about it, so I'm just kind of off the top of my head right now.
I definitely wouldn't be surprised if App State, especially after what they showed this last week, really gives A&M a run for their money. I think this game will kind of go how I assumed the last game would go, and it even kind of did to a certain extent, but where the game is a little bit close at halftime, and then Jimbo goes into the locker room at halftime, does maybe a little bit of yelling at the players, and they kind of whip themselves into shape and kind of show new life heading into the second half. That's something that happened a lot last season. Wouldn't be surprised if that's something that happens again this season based on the first game's performance. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up then, unless you have anything else to say.
No, I don't. I appreciate you having me on. It was fun.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you were here. Once again, Dan Davidson of the Appalachian. You can find him on Twitter at DanDavidson0. Thank you so much for coming on, and have a great day.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, man. You too.